And Plattsburgh Mayor Colin Read joins us now. Welcome, it's good to see you.
Thank you, nice seeing you again.
We've had the first 2 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Clinton County this week, and earlier in the week you declared a state of emergency for the city of Plattsburgh. Are you expanding that now today on Friday?
As a matter of fact, I am. I'm putting out orders right now to strengthen it even farther, and I think that complements well what the governor is doing at the state level.
And what is happening? Who is covered, and what does this new state of emergency order do?
Obviously, what I can do is things with regard to any city property and City of Plattsburgh staff, but I do make recommendations for the entire community to adhere to similar practices as well. I'm glad that you and I are 3 meters apart. The previous standard was closer to 2 meters apart. We're limiting completely access to any of our city buildings unless you're by appointment only. And we're really trying to encourage a lot of the necessary work we do in the community with regard to even things that you and I might consider mundane but are affecting the livelihood of some of the people in the community. We're figuring out ways to either do them by mail, by email, by online, or if absolutely necessary, do them somewhere off-site, somewhere where we have glass shields and somewhere we can exercise some additional safety precautions.
The governor today expanded from 75 to now 100% of the workforce. Stay out of the office, stay home unless they're essential. You did that earlier in the week here in Plattsburgh. A few days ago, you actually said that all city employees should stay home unless they're essential.
Well, all city employees that could work from home should work from home, and they are working from home. We've bought a number of licenses for them to extend and access their work computers from home. So that's about 50 of our employees. And you did note quite correctly that the 100% please stay at home and work from home premise of the governor just recently applies to private employers, non-essential industries. Much of what the city does is essential. I would hope it'd be essential. If not, probably the city shouldn't be doing it. We still have to maintain the water system and the integrity of the water system. We run a municipal utility for our lighting that has to be maintained, etc. So all these things will continue. We have to do the maintenance on these vehicles to make sure that we can still function there too. So a lot of our functions really will continue, but what we can do is instead of all of our employees congregating at one time and then going and fanning out in 2s and 3s and 4s to do their work, we're trying to isolate them as much as we possibly can. So they're going out in 1s or 1s and 2s, trying to work more independently. That may require us, because we only have a certain pieces of equipment they can use, to work in shifts. And so you may see our workers working in multiple shifts, but more in individually or smaller groups. Normally they don't have to work with the public directly very much, except for our first responders, obviously. But even there, we're putting in additional practices of wearing masks, using gloves, exchange documents if necessary at a distance or through some other means like electronically, but still maintaining all of our operations for the most part.
And you mentioned emergency workers, police and fire. They're on their normal shifts. They're vital, obviously, and they're still on the job.
They're more than normal. We're putting in a call-in procedure to allow people to be called in 24/7. We're canceling vacations. We put in a second ambulance, and we've added staffing to the first responders at the fire halls, knowing that they're going to be on the front lines. We're particularly concerned, obviously, for the elderly population, anybody defined as 60 or over, and anybody with any sort of compromised respiratory system. We need to make sure that our responders and emergency providers are there to assist these individuals and to transport them if necessary to the hospital. A lot of what we really are trying to do here, obviously, is to reduce the number of physical interactions that people have. You and I, on a typical day, we may interact with 30 people. If we can bring that 30 people down to 3 people, we can reduce the rate of interaction, hence the rate of infection, by a factor of 10. And flatten that curve people keep talking about. We don't want that peak of all of a sudden thousands of people inundating our healthcare system like you see in Italy. We know that Gavin Newsom from California recently estimated that about 55% of his population is going to be infected by at one time or another in just the next few months. That is somewhat inevitable. But if we can really spread that out over a few months or 6 months or 9 months rather than 3 or 4 weeks, we can really lower the rate of infection at any one time to a point where our hospital and healthcare providers can deal with it.
And you mentioned the hospital. For now, your understanding is the hospital with only the 2 cases here in Clinton County, the hospital's okay for now.
Coping for now, but I'm very concerned that we do our part in the community to make sure that they can stay ahead of this.
City Hall is now closed except for by appointment. City Gym, Rec Center, all closed.
Public library as well.
Public library. No idea how long that will be until further notice, I guess.
I think we should consider it to be essentially indefinitely for the foreseeable future. I wouldn't be surprised if we're dealing with this in one manner or another for many months to come. So we're really trying to establish a new mode of operations rather than give the sense that this is just something temporary that we're going to be resolving in a week or two. We really want to put the structures in place to be able to sustain this for as long as we possibly can.
Grocery stores staying open, pharmacies staying open, the essentials that people will need, they can still go out and get those. Those will remain open.
And of course I can't order that. That would require a governor order. It'd be almost equivalent to a martial law to do something with that, but I am encouraging them to follow the same practices to reduce the number of people at one place at one time. Now we know if we could spread the number of people who need services like picking up the groceries over a larger part of the 24-hour clock, we'd need fewer people in at one time. We'd also need fewer staffers at the grocery stores, et cetera, to handle them. So I really encourage all employers, and even in those industries that are essential like pharmacies and groceries, et cetera, to consider extending their hours, reducing their staffing load at any 1 hour by working at a shift structure like we're doing in the city, and then asking their customers to come in I'll gladly go in and shop at 1 in the morning if I think it's going to make a difference and save lives.
Restaurants and bars are closed to patrons coming in, but still takeout and deliveries. For now, that will continue so that food can get out to the people.
Excellent idea, and you really see some of the local providers and stepping up. I think you saw an article just recently about that.
And at the same time, while you're taking these steps to protect the city, you also realize the economic impact this is having on those businesses and having on the city. The number of people who have been laid off and are now out of work.
It is. It's terrible, and I really hope that we can come up with an economic stimulus package to ensure that that money gets into the pockets of those that are really, really going to be suffering economically from this. I know there's large airlines and aerospace manufacturing companies that are lobbying. But I really would hope that we can remedy the huge displacement it's going to have on our moms and pops and our local businesses and our local residents at that level.
And in the city, any steps being taken to help people who either need food or other help during these times?
The city government itself doesn't have much of a capacity in doing that. Certainly the United Way is stepping forward in a very ambitious way and bringing together a lot of disparate nonprofit groups. And I think that's just a wonderful effort.
The county is shutting down its public transit system as of Sunday. That, again, another step absolutely necessary. There are people that count on that public transit, but you just can't risk having people riding public transit right now.
I think that sets a very important tone. At this time, it's really not about the individual. The fact is, individually, we all have to make some sort of sacrifices to get through this. This is really trying to protect the community as a whole, and especially our most vulnerable members, those over the age of 60 and have compromised respiratory systems. What we're doing now and the sacrifices we're making is ultimately saving lives. I've got absolutely no doubt about it. And I think we're saving lives not in the ones or twos, but the tens and 20s and hundreds at some point. Certainly in the nation, in the thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if they can replicate some of the things that we're doing here.
The border, for all intents and purposes, is being closed to non-essential people. Travel restricted. However, trade will continue, and that's important.
Yeah, we have to keep that supply chain going because ultimately people are going to need to be fed. And so supply chain considerations are important. We've got one of the most robust supply chains between our partnership with Canada and the U.S. In the entire world. I think that if everybody does their part, I think everything will be fine. Certainly there's going to be some economic pain. We're going to come through it. Obviously there's going to be a recession. We'll get through it. Those are all relatively small considerations when you look at the human costs that will result if we don't get that right. A
number of companies in town that have a lot of employees will certainly be affected. Are any of them considered essential? Will they make the argument to the state that they're essential? Georgia Pacific for producing the bathroom tissue that's needed right now. Will the transportation manufacturers be able to make the argument that they should keep their assembly lines going?
I think they've already made that argument successfully, and obviously you know that determination is made by the state on a case-by-case basis, but I believe those determinations have already been made. One of the first requests, I've asked the community for ideas, and one of the first requests I had was, can you see if GP would be willing to ensure that our local company ensures that we have sufficient toilet paper for our local community. They've sent it up to headquarters to make that request, but again, a very sensible thing for us to be able to do to rally as a community.
Protection of people, first and foremost, stopping the spread, but if people can keep working, that's critical as well, if they can stay on the job.
That's right, and that's what we're trying to do, maintain as much service as we possibly can. Obviously, if there's some discretionary services like picking up leaves, et cetera, we may not be able to do that, but we need to try to create a sense of normalcy. People are going to be home doing much of their work, but we've created those mechanisms to do that.
Schools throughout the region are now closed for at least the next month. Do the overwhelming majority of the students have access to broadband so they can do their studies at home, unlike more rural districts where they have issues with broadband and getting the schoolwork to the kids?
You know, we're blessed in having very good broadband networks in the city, but we need to be aware that broadband and even access to food is a class issue. Those who are of lower incomes don't necessarily have things that many others would assume are a necessity. So things like closing our schools or closing our libraries really threatens their food security, threatens their access to broadband, threatens their ability to keep up with their studies. Those decisions, I think, were sound, had to be made for various other reasons, but there's a holistic problem when we try to respond to one area, we may be creating problems in another. Then we try and deal with those symptoms. I know the YMCA is really trying to step forward and see what they can do with daycare and during the day programs, expanding that to fill that gulf
for those
individuals.
Where both parents work.
And remember, one of the reasons why we want both parents working is if one of those employees is working at the hospital as a healthcare provider, we need them to be there caring for our elderly and the really critically ill, not worrying about whether their child is safe at home. So this obviously creates some compounding challenges, and that's why we really need to work as a community. Any
program to get school lunches to the kids out in the community that have that count on them?
There are those efforts. Another idea would be, shop for your neighbor, shop for your elderly neighbor. Plan a little bit ahead so you have to shop less frequently, but let's work in helping each other out at the same time with some of these concerns.
Everyone, of course, hopes this is over soon, but are you telling people to count on this for the foreseeable future, for potentially weeks and weeks to come?
I'd say months and months to come, and I'm not saying that from the perspective of I want this to last a long time. We're prepared to have it last almost indefinitely for as long as we need to do. We're trying to put in sustainable practices, but by stretching the human toll of this out across as many months as possible, we're going to lower the peak incidence at any one time. So it's very important for us to not overwrought the healthcare system by stretching it out, so that lower level of pain, but over a much longer period of time is going to, I think, ultimately reduce the total pain once we reflect on this.
Colin Read, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work. It's really important to get accurate information out to the public.